Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. I am Greg Munro. I'm the Director of Cities Alliance based in Brussels. We have a wonderful panel for you today. Our topic being new partnerships that work for people and the planet and linking livelihoods and nature-based solutions. I will introduce our panel individually just before they speak. But in the meantime, can I just point out two things? One, we are recording the session. And second, there's an opportunity for you to interact with our panel through questions. And on the screen, you will see the links to Slido and the QR code for Slido. So please use that code and submit your questions, and I will redirect them to the panel during the session. In the wake of increased interest and pledges from both the public and private sector to scale up nature-based solutions for climate action, it is time to go beyond the usual forms of collaboration. And the event showcases global partnerships between different partners uniting for the implementation of high-impact solutions for climate mitigation, adaptation, and livelihood creation. This event provides a platform to showcase some of the challenges, opportunities, and lessons. And when blending nature-based solutions with active civil society engagement, private sector engagement, multilateral engagement, and local government and funder engagement. We have a very strong Uganda focus, and our panel will be speaking of their experience in Uganda. I think for large parts of the world, and particularly for sub-Saharan Africa, there is a huge backlog on infrastructure. And it's only through infrastructure that we can reach the most number of people in development in sub-Saharan Africa. But this is obviously with great risk. And it's important that we have safeguards around the economy, around social safeguards, but increasingly and very importantly, environmental safeguards. As Cities Alliance, we've been working a lot in Uganda on infrastructure, and my colleague will talk about it shortly. But our work in the wetlands, for example, has just shown how you need to collaborate across multiple sectors. And that is what today is going to be about. So I'm going to immediately go to my colleague, Deborah Asikit, who is the Country Program Manager of Cities Alliance. Deborah is a legal professional with extensive project management experience in the development sector on social and environmental safeguards, territorial approach to local development, local economic development, local governance, leadership development, and knowledge transfer in human rights. Deborah, over to you.
Thank you very much, Greg. Good evening indeed. Good morning from sunny Kampala here. And will you kindly show the presentation?
Okay, it's on the screen, Deborah, so you can carry on talking.
Okay, great, fantastic. Thank you so much. It's very lovely to share our experience from Uganda. And I'll start by sharing exactly what Cities Alliance is. And it's an alliance basically for different organizations or entities that support sustainable urban development. So we have a category that is just countries like Uganda, Sweden, Germany, among others. We have international organizations like UNICEF, World Bank. We also have universities that are research think tanks, NGOs like Slum Dwellers International, AVSI, among others. And so it is an alliance that brings together the different processes, different thoughts that different urban development oriented organizations actually want to support. And if you could kindly go to the next point, the next slide, kindly, thank you. And as Cities Alliance, we always try and bring solutions. We support national governments, we support cities, we support communities, but also local governments. And we do this in partnership with NGOs and also local actors within the community. And in Uganda, we have one project where we have actually spearheaded the implementation of safeguards, environmental safeguards, specifically to protect the wetland, which is a major ecosystem in Kampala city in Uganda. And this is the Chinawataka wetland. You would wonder, why would you focus on just the wetland? But it is part of the different urbanization processes that Cities Alliance does focus on. And so in this particular wetland, we are implementing social and environmental safeguards for a major government project called the Kampala Jinja Expressway. And under this project, with funding from the European Union, we're supporting the government of Uganda to design social safeguards, environmental safeguards, so that this expressway, which is actually 75 kilometers and cuts across a major slum area, slums, informal settlement, but also the Chinawataka wetland, has safeguards that can be implemented to mitigate the effects. And so under this project, we have 5 components. The first one and the most critical one actually is the governance component. And this is where we bring or design a consultation mechanism for the different components, be it social safeguards, be it environmental safeguards. And here we look at engagement, not just to tick the box, but actually we recognize that wetlands, for example, and human beings are part of an ecosystem, and they must coexist. They must mutually benefit each other. So this particular wetland, which is the Chinawataka wetland, is about 1,500 hectares, and almost 50% of it is actually damaged. And so under this safeguard design project, we actually tackle and design interventions that can restore it. But we cannot do that. The easy way is to go in and tick the box. But we actually start by setting up this governance system where there is mutual consultation, there is building of trust, there is negotiation, there is recognition of the different interests of the different actors. And so that's why I say it's the major component of the intervention, because it really touches on the constructive and meaningful engagement, be it on environmental, be it on the social safeguard. And so the second component is about the low-cost housing and urban renewal, which is really about slum upgrading. And again, we consult with the informal settlements using the mechanism, which my colleague Sarah will talk about shortly, called settlement forums, to come up with solutions, to come up with safeguards to be designed for them. The other one is around the community assistance, which is about really supporting the most vulnerable to move from the right of way, not just by building for them houses or constructing houses, but also livelihood support and also skills development. The fourth one is around small business transition, which focuses on informal settlements. But I would like to focus so much on the Chinawataka Sustainable Wetland Management Initiative, which aims at restoring, rehabilitating, and preserving the wetland. I mentioned that the wetland is 1,500 hectares, and the catchment area is another 2,500 hectares. So it's a major part of the ecosystem of Kampala City and the metropolitan area as such. And we have designed interventions, recognizing that if they are not designed, if it's not preserved, then it's going to get worse. Already almost 50% of it is degraded. And if there is no intervention, then it's only going to get worse, because urbanization is only going to increase. If you could kindly go to the next slide. Yeah, so how do we design these safeguards? I mentioned earlier that we recognize the need for the wetlands and humans to coexist. And one of the things that we found initially was that if you look at the picture at the top, it's the wetland is treated as a place to dispose of waste to, not a precious entity or precious part of the community, but somewhere where you can dump waste and not preserve. And then the residents, the informal settlements, did not really treat it as anything that is major or affects them. Never mind that there's always going to be flooding whenever it rains. There are issues of health because of the level of indiscriminate waste disposal that you can see there. And so the first step that we have done is to create that relationship. First, to make the informal settlements, the residents, recognize that they can live together with the wetland, they can preserve it, they can stop degrading it. And what we also did then was we recognize that making interventions within the project area was not sufficient if we ignored the downstream or the upstream of the safeguard. And so what we did was have a major feasibility study for the wetland, for the Chinawataka wetlands. And this makes recommendations for all different actors, not just for the expressway, but any other actor within Kampala, any other development partner that wants to make interventions to preserve this wetland can just plug into this feasibility study, because there are so many different interventions on what the different parties can actually do. And a major part of it as well was the waste management. As you can see, the indiscriminate waste disposal. What we did was find ways to recycle the waste, to organize the waste management system itself, but also develop a broader, much more broader waste management system. When I say we, I'm talking about we jointly with the community through the settlement forum. Like I said, the easy part is to go in and say, oh, let's do this. You need to do this. But here actually, and my colleague will talk about this, we went to the community. The communities proposed what needed to be done. They proposed a biofuel toilet, which you can see just in the lower picture. And they said, this is what could work for us. And as a development, as a partner, we then try the different models for it until it passes certain tests. And so those are some of the interventions that we made. If you could kindly go to the next slide. And so a major part of Cities Alliance's work is to work in partnership, not just with the development sector, not just with the private sector, but also with the government sector, because this is what makes interventions sustainable. If we did it on our own and the result is there, but then you haven't left behind a sustainable mechanism to sustain it. And so what we do is build these partnerships at the lowest level. We recognize that not a single party, not the community alone, not government alone, not local government alone can make a difference. And so we do a liaison role of bringing together all the different partners, be it from the community, the lowest level. You can see the different meetings that are taking place, but then we bring this up to the national level through an interministerial committee. We build capacity where there is need to, be it at the community level, be it at the national level, by, for example, framing a policy framework with government. And this is what has actually sustained the initiatives that we have made under the wetland initiative. And so I think that the partnership approach, we believe that the partnership approach allows for the inclusive management, and management indeed of the ecosystem requires a multi-partnership approach where there is negotiation of interests, there's accountability, there's ownership, and which makes it sustainable. And so I'd like to invite my colleague from the National Slum Dwellers Federation of Uganda, which is one of the over 9 partners that we work with under this particular initiative. So Sarah Nandutu, if you could kindly take it over from there. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Deborah. So just Sarah, before you start, I just for the people online. So Slum Dwellers International is a network of community-based organizations of the urban poor in 32 countries and across hundreds of towns and cities across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And Sarah is the national coordinator of Slum Dwellers Federation of Uganda. And she is a community leader who has mobilized slum dwellers in the major towns of Uganda. And as an SDR leader is a grassroots leader working with local, national, and international partners who try to intervene in the challenges faced by the urban poor. So Sarah, can I hand over to you?
Thank you very much, Greg, and thanks, Deborah. I just want to add what Deborah has just said. I don't know, I can't see the slides, but I will do well to talk even if I don't see my slides. So picking up from where Deborah said, KJE or Kampala Ginger Express Highway has indeed shown us that partnership works. And not alone that project, but for us with the Cities Alliance, I think we have seen what partnership works through Cities Alliance, because besides this project, we've done so many other projects, and it has caused a number of changes in communities. But specifically for KJE, Deborah mentioned about the governance structures that were put in place. As a network of the Federation of the Urban Poor in Uganda, our major role is to mobilize communities into saving groups. And this is the backbone of everything that can cause development in the society. So the saving groups, when they come together, of course, at village level, they end up forming a settlement forum. And in the affected settlements, which are 11, we managed to form settlement forums, which was a backbone of discussions to undertake this particular project. You know, it's very difficult to talk to an individual and then you succeed in development. It calls for numbers. So we had to mobilize communities to accept the project and making sure that they are not left behind. Through the No One Worse Off project and through the forums, communities were engaged and were able to identify key challenges as elaborated by Deborah. And some of these was the restoration of the wetland. So in the wetland restoration project, a number of activities were to be undertaken, knowing that this is a slum community and many people have encroached it. So we had to derive a means of how do we sensitize communities to know that they need to live by the wetland. So we had to develop guidelines that are now being taught in schools. And this all was speaking to partnership because we had to bring in schools. Imagine you're constructing a project, which is a road, but now schools come in. Not only that, the government like City Council, Kampala City Council had to come on board. And then in EMAD, it is the National Environmental Protection Unit of the government. So we work in collaboration with them. Project for the road, but is bringing together different key partners. And in this project, we had to form school environmental clubs where we developed guidelines. That guidelines are going to support different schools around that area to sell out the messages about wetland restoration. And not only that, because this project is looking at how not leaving anyone worse off, it had a component of livelihoods. In one of the pictures that Deborah shared, the sanitation block, the biofuels toilet, you realize there were women constructing. And this project is just gender sensitive to such a way that women were brought on board even when we were trying to sell out the biofuel projects. They were skilled and indeed they constructed the projects. Now they are averting effects of contaminating water levels by building biofuel projects which are friendly to the environment, at the same time earning a living. That's responding to livelihood. And besides that, the same project under the community support center, 30 youth were trained to be mansions, and these mansions are now supporting communities to transform their houses and in preparation to the next phase of moving to leaving the affected areas to other areas. So youth were given skills, and now these skills are translated into livelihoods because they're now employed and are able to sustain a living by just having a project in the community. And for us, above all, the way the whole project has brought us together, different partners, the Roads Authority, National Environmental Protection Unit, Kampala Capital City Authority, international organizations like European Union and Cities Alliance, and we are seeing tangible results. This is what we call partnership that works. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. So let me now go to the Velux Group as well as World Wildlife Fund. So in 2020, the Velux Group and WWF launched a 20-year partnership focused on the conservation and restoration of forests through a number of forest projects around the globe. The partnership simultaneously aims at enhancing biodiversity and improving livelihoods of local communities in the project areas. And the first project is already being implemented in Uganda. So with me on the panel, I have Jamie Rusby, who is the Director of Group Sustainability at Velux. And as well as Simon Weradong, who's a Conservation Director at WWF, and they will tell us more about this partnership and the forest projects. But first, there will be a short film on the Uganda project.
The forests are the lungs of the world. We need each and every tree. When I see a forest degraded, I feel the pain because it loses integrity. It uses its ecological function as a unit. WWF Velux project is supporting National Forest Authority in restoration of degraded forests and conserving of existing forest reserves. Conservation of natural resources is not a one man's dance.
Great, thank you. And this demonstrates the value of partnership and providing a best practice example of how corporate investments can provide multiple benefits with other partners. So Jamie is the Group Sustainability Director of Velux. And for those of you who don't know, Velux is a globally leading roof window manufacturer. And the company is over 80 years old. For 2 decades, Jamie has worked to harness the power of business to make life better for people on the planet. He joined Velux Group last year as Group Director for Sustainability and is responsible for developing and accelerating the implementation of the group's 2030 sustainability strategy. And he has also experience in other organizations like IKEA Group and the Inca Group. So, Jamie, can you tell us why did Velux, a globally leading roof window manufacturer, decide to enter this partnership with WWF and invest in forest carbon projects? And how does it fit into the Velux's sustainability strategy?
Yes, thank you very much, and good to be here on this panel and to hear other exciting projects in Uganda. And I'm delighted to be here also with Simon from WWF, who is our a partner, as well as colleagues from WWF Denmark. And I think it was well said in the intro film that preserving natural resources is not one man's dance. And I think given the situation we're in today, I think these beyond business as usual forms of collaboration are what is needed today. And I'll have a few slides to share with you around our efforts to tackle climate change and in doing so to go even beyond our value chain and invest in projects to capture our entire historical carbon footprint from our operations. So this commitment sits as part of our sustainability strategy launched in 2020. And I think it's worth saying that if you go to the next slide, that our commitment to capture our historical emissions in partnership with WWF, it is part of an overall climate strategy where we, of course, are focused on decarbonizing our business and our value chain. And we've set our reduction targets in line with a 1.5 degree pathway and to follow the most ambitious pathway of the Paris Agreement. And for us, that translates into a 50% cut of emissions across our value chain. And if you look at the line across the top here, the white line, that is what would happen to our emissions with business as usual. And when you follow the red line, you can see that actually by 2024, 2025, we will already need to start bending the curve downwards and then achieve radical reductions in emissions up to 2030 to halve our carbon footprint. So this is an enormous challenge for us, and it also cannot be achieved without working in partnership with others. And even today, we announced a partnership with a key aluminium supplier where we'll work to decarbonize the aluminium in our products together with a joint roadmap to do that. So this is where 95% of our emissions sit, and it's a big challenge for us. But if you go to the next slide, we actually, as well as looking forward to the future, we also said we're 80 years old as a company. We've spent many years developing as a business, and we also wanted to take responsibility for our historical emissions. So what you can see back, if you can read the slide, is right the way back to 1941, where Velux was founded as a company. And we took the decision to say, okay, let's look back to when we were founded and look at our entire emissions from our operations and calculate that. And there was no methodology available to do this, so we had to develop a bespoke methodology and then had it validated externally. But that really gave us a figure that we needed to capture. And then on the right-hand side, you can see up to 2041, when we're 100 years old, we will have invested in projects to capture the equivalent amount of carbon. And then we said, okay, how should we do this, and what approach should we take? And we decided, actually, given the crisis of both climate but also nature, and also the need to develop livelihoods and tackle questions of inequality, we wanted to do this in a way that benefited not only the climate but also people and nature equally. If you go to the next slide. And we identified, of course, WWF as an organization with enormous experience in conservation, particularly forest conservation, and also working with livelihoods as a key lever to be able to deliver outcomes for nature and the climate. So we calculated a total figure of 4.5 million tons of CO2 that we needed to capture. And we started a partnership lasting 20 years with WWF, where we say we will aim with forest projects to capture that amount, and even put in place a 25% buffer, so we capture 5.6 million tons of CO2. If you go to the next slide. Okay, that wasn't the next slide I was hoping for, but maybe let's go back one. All right. So I think the approach we've taken is a partnership with a true partnership with WWF, where we rather than taking an arm's length approach where we will purchase offsets or work in such a manner, we really wanted to work together and design solutions that benefited equally people, nature, and the climate. And we following the WWF blueprint for high quality interventions that work for people, nature, and climate in the work there. And of course, that states that as well as the simultaneous benefit to people, nature, and climate, community should be at the core of both the design and the implementation of the projects. There will be a portfolio of projects. The first one has started in Uganda, and we are moving towards the third-party verification to the Vera standard there. And just finished before handing over to Simon, who will be able to tell us a lot more about the project. But we are getting moving there, and planting seedlings and working with alternative livelihood options for people who live around the project. And one final comment on the what happens to this rich resource of the carbon capture and the carbon credits that are generated in the project. We will capture an equivalent to our historical emissions, but we will actually donate the carbon generated through the projects to the government of Uganda as a contribution to the conditional NDC, the conditional national determined contribution of Uganda. So the benefit will stay within the country of Uganda. I think that's all. I won't try and go into the project itself, because we have, of course, Simon here can give us much more detail and information about that. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie. So Simon is the Conservation Program Manager for WWF Uganda. He's a management specialist with skills and work experience with various agencies and training in environmental and natural resources, forestry, project planning and management, and climate change governance. He is an active policy analyst and a key player in the environmental natural resources management sector. He's also an active member of the Uganda government delegation to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So, Simon, how has this partnership fared in Uganda, and what has the progress been?
Yeah, thank you, Greg. My name is Simon Weredwong, as you heard, acting country director of WWF Uganda, in addition to conservation programs manager. This partnership, I think, to sum it in one statement or two, is that it is a partnership that has helped us to demonstrate the mission of WWF, which is creating an environment where stopping the degradation of nature and creating an environment where people live in harmony with their surroundings. And when you look at the Velux partnership, it is a partnership that has tried to touch on these different aspects that touch on the ecosystem. Of course, also to recognize what my other colleagues from Uganda have said, and my colleague from the Velux partnership, the Velux group. You will find that in the forest ecosystem in Uganda, one of the things that are causing people to degrade the forest is because they lack livelihood. And limited livelihood opportunities are actually key drivers to forest degradation. Just like my sisters talked about the wetlands. Therefore, addressing livelihoods is critical for improving communities' lives, and also getting them actively engaging in related interventions. And this carbon program is one of those that has tried to set up that nexus, which is connecting people, the communities, and their environment. Next slide, please. So when you look at WWF and the work it is doing together with the Velux group, you realize that when we were approached by Velux, we thought about where do we put this project. And together with the other partners who we work with in the country, Wildlife Authority, Forest Authority, we zeroed down on the Albertine Rift, which is a key biodiversity hotspot area, where a lot of degradation has taken place. If you look at that picture on the screen right now, on the area where it is very green, that is a national park, a forested national park. And on the extreme left, you realize there are some brown areas there, and that is the community lands. So they have cleared each and everything in search for livelihood. And you ask yourself a question. You have a protected area just a few meters the other side, but this way, people have over-cultivated this area, and they have nothing left. So the introduction of a carbon project was a turning point for the lives and livelihoods of these people. Why? Because the Velux intervention does not only look at carbon, which is going to be stored there for the next 20 years. Actually, if we were to look at only carbon, it would be even a disincentive to these communities to get involved in forest restoration work. So we work with but we work in this situation whereby we look at what are the alternatives that the communities can work on to get some livelihood in the next 1 month, in the next 2 years, as we accumulate this carbon for the next 20 years. So the Albertine is where we do this work in partnership with the Forest Authority, which is a government agency. And so far, I must say we have done a number of things together with these other groups. The approaches we use, next slide please, is the one which brings in all stakeholders in one table to discuss, to identify where pressures exist, and also explain to them the issues around carbon, which is a new concept in some communities. among us as professionals, we know about it because we have been speaking about it. But if you go to a rural grandmother or even a grandfather in some of these villages where we come from, and you tell them carbon, I think they will even wonder what we are talking about. But we sit down with these women, these youths, these young people, and tell them that carbon is air, which is released to the environment when we cut down trees, when we burn them into charcoal, when we clear forested areas. And that begins to change the environment, change the weather patterns, and they begin to affect even the agricultural inputs and even water that you need for your animals and the like. And that is when people begin to understand. So we use a mixture of afforestation, restoration, that is in lands that are owned by people. You saw those gray areas. So we do, in those gray areas which is owned by people, we do afforestation. We can also say we do afforestation in the degraded central forest reserves, those protected areas of the forest which had been cut down by people. And now we use the same people to plant trees in those areas while giving them the importance of planting those trees. And we do restoration. Restoration now is where we work with the authorities to basically sensitize people to reduce or remove pressure from this existing forest. And this has also been tagged into the existing programs like RED+, which has been run by the government since, I think, 2012, which is also picking up in the country. So far, we are estimating that about 48% of the carbon of capture will come from this afforestation and restoration activities. And as I've said earlier, the communities play a critical part. Why? Because in the first cases, they are the ones who cause this degradation of this forest. And now, if we do restoration without involving them, they will go back and cut it again. But involving them and is giving them the indication of why we are doing so gives us even a safeguard that these trees will not be cut, because people are now aware of the dangers of cutting down trees and causing the degradation of this environment. So in this program that we are looking at, we have a number of outcomes that are expected. But let me give you a simple scenario. Going back to the picture that we looked at first. In that national park that is shown there, we will find that there are animals on the other side, there are trees and forests on the other side, but there are crops of maize, gardens, cassava also this side. So you realize that animals normally cross into this side and of people's gardens and eat them and destroy them, bringing in what we call human-wildlife conflict. So Velux partnership with the bringing people and giving them alternative livelihood, it is also helping the government of Uganda address the issues of human wildlife conflict. Why? Because if I've lost my garden of maize and I have trees that were planted here, and tomorrow I can sell these trees and they get money, maybe even 3 times the maize that I lost, I do not get angry with animals. I do not get angry with the wildlife authority or the forest authority for keeping a forest that has brought animals to destroy my crops. One clear example was last week when we were having a meeting with the stakeholders in Kampala. And the one renowned leader came and they gave a testimony that in his village, he is a pro-conservation. He created the forest, he maintained his forest, natural forest, and snakes, pythons, and the vermins, monkeys started coming and settling in his forest, which was good, which is positive conservation. But when the animals became hungry, they walked into the neighbors' homes, including his own home, and ate his goats. So the issue now is, what do we do when conservation outcome, with the positive outcomes of conservation? So Velux is helping a restoration program. We are going to restore some of these forests. Wildlife is going to come into some of those areas, and sometimes they may cross into people's lands. So when there is no alternatives, then you will find a situation where people are running away again from conservation and going back to demand for the cutting down of these trees. But when we have opportunities where there are alternatives, like it has been demonstrated in this partnership, you find that conservation is sustainable. So what I can say in this partnership, it has also brought in the concept of sustainable conservation and inclusive conservation, because we have different parties involved, the government, the communities, the conservation agencies like WWF and others working in partnership to ensure that this program works. So we are also looking at strengthening civil society and building coordinating mechanisms, including linking the outcomes of this project to the NDC. My colleague has already told you that we are going to sequester in this program 1 million tons of carbon equivalent. And we are not going to sell this one, because some people were worried that you are going to sequester 1 million and sell it. That is going to be big money for you as a conservation agency. But we decided that this is not going to be sold. It is going to be donated to the government NDC, and that will be a big contribution to the mitigation priorities of our country. I want to bring you to what have we done today. And looking at this work that we have done we have done a number of engagement. We have done inventories. We started by sensitization, selection of sites, and working in around the 4 central reserves that so far we have been planting and restoring in over 200 hectares now. This is just year 2 of the project, and we have 5 years of planting and another 15 years of monitoring, verification, and the like. I think to do with what do we learn from this project. I've talked about this in my previous cases and the submissions. That climate action and the carbon sequestration requires community involvement. Without communities, forget about a carbon project, because you're going to plant, you're going to restore, but tomorrow when challenges comes, they will go back and they cut them again. But also the linkages between livelihood and restoration needs to be emphasized for any success to be thought about. And also we need to address the issue of leakages and have in realistic terms, the success needs to consider how we ensure exclusivity and permanence. We have worked on this to ensure this with the government to sign a memorandum of understanding that these areas where this restoration and planting is taking place will be secured for the period of the project, and maybe even more than that, such that government does not get another investor and gives away the area. So that is going to also be sealed in a legal framework, and to us that will be a big safeguard. I also want to say that we need to consider the issue of environmental social safeguard, because some of these things have aspects to do with that. Thank you very much. I submit.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you to our 4 speakers. So we have got some questions that have been put on the screen. So let me go back to Deborah and Sarah. There's a question here that when you have these multiple partnerships, for example, in the Kampala Ginger Expressway project, if you have multiple partnerships, how do you deal with different expectations and different priorities within that partnership, and where they could be competing? How do you deal with getting everybody on the same page?
I shall try and respond to that. Obviously, it's a very complex process, and it goes without saying that there will be different interests, there will be different priorities. And even in our own project, this was one of the biggest challenges at the start, because everybody's looking at what do I gain out of it, as either a private sector player, as a government entity, as a community, what is for me? That is the driving factor at the start. But I think how we have dealt with it, and quite successfully, is by building trust. I would say we would spend the first 6 months actually just building trust and agreeing on the common interest. The common interest being, let no one be worse off. Let everybody who's going to be affected by the right of way, whether directly along the right of way or indirectly, because their livelihood will be affected, let their livelihood either be restored, but even better, let it be improved. And the question then would be, so you as a private sector, what do you have to bring on the table? As a local government, what do you have to bring on the table? As a national government, as the roads authority, as a national housing authority. So you have national housing donating some land, saying, okay, we'll give this land for some upgrading. And so I think it calls for a lot of patience, a lot of transparency, but also being accountable. Where you've not made progress, you say, we've not made progress and we need you to do this. So it's a lot of dialogue, even with the community itself, because the community will say, why are you doing this? We've always done things the way we want to do it. How does this add value to us? So it's a lot of emphasis on transparency, being accountable, but more importantly, building trust through constant dialogue. Even when there are hiccups, some people want to withdraw, you have to come in and just facilitate the dialogue and make sure that everybody at the end of it all actually is driving towards the same. I would say that's what's worked the best. And yeah.
Good. Thanks. Sarah, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just a little bit on that. What I remember very well is that the reputation of the lead organization, Cities Alliance, being an organization with good reputation, attracted a number of partners who were able to believe in what we were having at table, but also the community engagements. Because once you made the communities to understand what is going to be done, then that was all. Because normally what brings about these frictions is the beneficiaries. If they're not comfortable with what you're bringing on table, then you know that different entities won't be able to come together for the common good. So that stood out as one of the key factors.
Thanks, Sarah. So, Jamie, I've got a question for you. It's very impressive what Velux has done. And Velux has clearly gone down the route of being active rather than passive in its responses on this. How can you persuade other private sector players to be active rather than passive in the responses like you have? Are there opportunities for you to showcase this amongst your peers?
Yes, thanks for the question. I think it's a case of when we've had this discussion internally and also with our management that the situation today, I think it does call for companies to go beyond business as usual in many ways. And I think of course the first effort that companies need to take when it comes to climate is to decarbonize their business and their value chain. But I think given the situation we are in today, then it does call for that thinking to go even beyond that. And I think that's clearly what is outlined in the science-based target framework now for companies to do, that it is a responsibility and an opportunity now for companies to go beyond their value chains and specifically to invest in projects that benefit nature and also livelihoods together. So I think the framework for companies to work with in this area is now clear. And I think it takes just more discussions like this, more opportunities to describe what can be achieved when you do think a little bit beyond your business as usual and you work in partnership with others. And I think to say, is there a traditional business case for doing this type of activity? I would say to that, there isn't a short-term business case for it. But then, of course, if you're able to take a longer-term perspective, we, like all businesses, depend on a stable climate. We depend on nature to be successful in the future as a business. So I think it really is a now or never moment for businesses not only to look at their own business and value chain, but to go beyond that and see what they can do to remedy the situation we're in.
Good, thank you, Jamie.
Okay.
So, Simon, when you talk about alternative livelihoods, there's a question from Slido. Are there specific needs of vulnerable groups in the communities also addressed? For example, women and youth.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. If we talk about the communities that live near forests, then the specific need number one is food. The other one is water. And you can also talk in general terms, income for taking their children to school and also doing a few things to run errands around them. So in that case, you will realize that anything that can bring money, and it is ecologically sensitive to the environment, is worth thinking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. So we have another question on Slido, and it's to anybody on the panel who wants to, or all of you. So there's evidence indicating underfunding is a common driver stopping many communities and nations in implementing climate adaptation and mitigation program. And according to the title of the session, how can we address issues of insufficient partnership and insufficient funding, especially for the Global South? If any of you would like to take that question. So it's a very general question, but how do we get more funding to the Global South? And then how do we get more partnership like this wonderful Ugandan examples, these two Ugandan examples that we have?
I can go first and share the example of the particular wetland that we're talking about. I think actually perhaps the bigger challenge might be attitude or perception change first and foremost. And from our experience, there's been a lot of goodwill from the community. So we have had we haven't talked about all the outcomes or results, but we have what we call the Community Upgrading Fund, which is a small infrastructure project, be it on waste management, be it a water source, be it a security lighting, be it on making of briquettes, for example. Now, what the community normally does is once they have this, what Sarah talked about, a savings group, first of all, they mobilize their own resources. And once they have mobilized these resources, they are then able to tap into, say, either a credit facility or a government project, or use their own resources to actually put together a waste management or waste recycling system. So I think what the funding could support to do is actually to trigger the process. And then for it to be sustainable, then the community would take it forward using their own resources. And these resources can be financial, but they can also be time, they can also be knowledge, experience. And because it benefits them, they are able to embrace it and own it and take it forward. So I think for as long as money is brought and put in to tick a box, to look like a ticker box, money just goes down the drain. But if you reverse it the other way around and say, let's start with the community and then put the money in, then that becomes more sustainable. And they own it, they own the process, and they can actually also capitalize the interventions. Yeah, that's what I expect based on our project experience here. Yeah.
Thanks, Deborah. Simon?
I think I can also talk something about this. And in my view, I think these partners always look for what they can do, which can be meaningful to the lives of the people they support, but also to their businesses. So I would say something like having the right mix of interventions and not doing things which looks like a mismatch. To me, that would really be good. And the other thing also is, as the development organizations from the Global South, we need to practice transparency and honesty in our systems, because this will give confidence to the partners in the other side in coming to work with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon.
Yeah, just a little bit on that is that we could also look at scaling up some of the programs because what I know is that in most cases now, like such a project, initiatives have been made, and we well-wishers can as well build on the existing projects. Because I know that out there people could be having resources to support climate change issues. So then to put money in the right place, we need to look at groups that have been able to do a lot more of these things. And that would be the right, with good reputation, of course, those could be the right groups to target. Like he has just said, Peter, accountability is critical, and this is what is failing most of us from accessing resources to improve on our livelihoods. Yeah, that's all.
Thanks, Sarah. There was an earlier question, Jamie, on are there any other plans and future partnerships that Velux might do? Clearly, there's people in the audience thinking about the future of a future partnership with you.
I think we have set ourselves an ambitious task with our carbon capture target and our partnership with WWF, which, as I mentioned, it's a 20-year partnership. And the Uganda project is actually the first project in a portfolio of projects in the partnership. So I'd say we have our hands full today, I think, with our current partner. But I think the benefit of the project will of the partnership and the portfolio will be realized in a number of countries around the world, and we will announce those projects actually in the second quarter of next year.
Thanks. And I think in the meantime, keep promoting it across the other private sector entities that you deal with. So I'm afraid we've only got 3 minutes left. So we've run out of time. So if I can just briefly sum up and say, so we've heard about the Kampala Ginger Expressway and the wetlands, with the experience of Cities Alliance and SDI, and this partnership between Velux and WWF on the forest carbon project. But what's very clear across from all of the presenters and your projects is that to respond to the climate crisis, it's going to require multiple partnerships and multiple stakeholders. And key, absolutely key in those stakeholders are the communities themselves. And I chaired a session in the last COP in Glasgow, and Sarah, we had somebody from SDI on the panel. He was very powerful. And she said, you can talk in the global north about climate crisis, but you need to think and you need to talk to us living in informal settlements, because don't look at us as victims. We have solutions, and we have solutions that maybe you experts in the global north haven't even thought of yet. So it was very powerful and stuck with me ever since. So I'm glad I'm telling the story again in this COP. And it's important, and I think it's also come across, especially with the WWF input on, it's about the relationship between the individual and the community and the environment in which they live. And that it is also important that it's holistic. We can't just go at unidimensional. You've all said it. It's more than just the forest. It's more than just the wetland. It's also about livelihoods and looking at the whole holistic approach to interventions. And I mean, we spoke about livelihoods, and because only when you include livelihoods and access to livelihoods that you actually stop the degradation of the forests or the destroying of the wetlands. And then again, all of our initiatives and any initiatives, we need safeguards. And safeguards are not just about having no one worse off, but also about trying to make sure that socially, economically, and environmentally, any intervention means that everybody individually and at community level are better off. So I would like to thank our 4 panelists. It's been a short 1 hour, packed 1 hour, but I think it's been really, really good, and some really good examples from Uganda. And So thank you for your time, and to the audience, thank you for your participation in this event. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.